I remember the exact night it started. That kind of pain that doesn't knock before entering. It just takes over. A sharp, pulsating toothache that seemed to have its own rhythm, echoing through my jaw, climbing into my head, stealing every ounce of silence I used to take for granted. Lying in bed became impossible. Thinking straight? Even harder. And what struck me the most wasn't just the pain itself. It was how something so small could completely dominate my life. At first, I did what almost everyone does. I reached for painkillers. One pill, then another hours later. Temporary relief would come, like a brief pause in a storm, but it never lasted. And deep down, I knew I wasn't solving anything. I was just muting the signal. The body was clearly trying to say something, and I kept pressing snooze. That's when a question started forming in my mind, quietly but persistently. Why do we accept this cycle so easily? Pain appears, we silence it, it returns, and we repeat. No curiosity about the root, no attempt to understand what's really happening beneath the surface. The first few days were the worst, not just because of the pain itself, though that was relentless, but because of how it infiltrated everything else. I couldn't focus during meetings. Words came out slower than they should have because half my attention was dedicated to managing the throbbing in my jaw. Eating became a strategic operation. Which side could I chew on without triggering another wave? Which foods were soft enough to not make things worse? And sleep. Sleep became this fragile, elusive thing. I'd lie down, finally exhausted enough to drift off, and then the pain would intensify, as if lying horizontal changed the pressure somehow, redirecting blood flow, amplifying every nerve ending in that tooth. I'd get up, walk around, take another painkiller, even though I knew the previous one was still in my system, sit on the edge of the bed and wonder how something so small behind a single tooth could hijack an entire existence. That's when the real frustration set in. Because I wasn't ignoring this, I was addressing it. Or at least, I thought I was. I had a drawer full of over-the-counter options, ibuprofen, acetaminophen, the extra-strength versions, gel caps that promised faster absorption. I rotated between them, following the dosage instructions religiously, trying to find some combination that would give me more than 3 or 4 hours of relief. But it was always temporary. The pain would retreat just enough to let me function. And then, like clockwork, it would return. Sometimes duller, sometimes sharper, but always there, lurking in the background, reminding me that nothing had actually changed. And here's what nobody tells you about living with constant pain. It changes you psychologically. You start to anticipate it. You wake up in the morning, and your first thought isn't about the day ahead, it's about whether the pain will be manageable today. You make decisions based on it. Cancel plans. Avoid certain conversations. Limit your range of motion because you've learned which movements trigger a spike. It becomes the lens through which you experience everything else. I started avoiding the dentist for reasons I didn't want to admit. Cost was part of it. Dental work isn't cheap, and I didn't have great insurance. But it was more than that. It was fear. Fear of what they'd find. Fear that I'd let something minor become major through neglect. Fear of the drilling, the needles, the vulnerability of sitting in that chair with your mouth open while someone else takes control. So I delayed, and I justified it. The painkillers are working, I told myself. It's manageable. I'll deal with it when I have more time, more money, less stress. But the truth is, I was trapped in a holding pattern. Not getting better. not getting worse enough to force action, just existing in this low-grade crisis that had become normal. That's when I started researching alternatives, not because I'm anti-medicine or looking for some natural cure-all fantasy, but because I was desperate for something, anything, that might break this cycle without requiring an immediate, expensive, fear-inducing dental intervention. I went down rabbit holes, forum posts about home remedies, medical studies about tooth pain mechanisms, traditional medicine practices from different cultures. Most of it was noise. Anecdotal stories that didn't translate to real solutions. Pseudoscience dressed up in medical language. Products marketed as miracle cures that were just overpriced versions of things that didn't work. But somewhere in that mess of information I found something different. References to traditional Japanese oral care practices, not the modern commercialized version you see in toothpaste ads, but older methods. Cultural habits passed down through generations, techniques designed not for cosmetic appeal, but for maintaining genuine oral health and managing pain naturally. At first I was skeptical, because if this really worked, wouldn't everyone know about it? Wouldn't it be the standard approach instead of some obscure practice buried in research papers and cultural histories? But the more I dug, the more compelling the evidence became. These weren't wild claims. They were documented practices with physiological explanations for why they worked. They aligned with what modern science understands about inflammation, circulation, bacterial balance, and pain perception. And the testimonials weren't from people selling something, they were from practitioners, researchers, people who'd integrated these methods into their lives and experienced genuine relief. So I decided to try it, not as a replacement for eventual dental care. I knew I'd still need to address the underlying cause, but as a bridge. A way to manage the pain and potentially improve the situation while I figured out my next steps. As I started digging deeper, I realized something unsettling. Toothaches aren't just about the tooth. They're often linked to inflammation, bacterial imbalance, nerve sensitivity, even stress responses in the body. It's a system reacting, not just a single point, failing. And yet most solutions we rely on are designed for speed, not depth. That was the first major insight that changed how I thought about this. Western approaches to tooth pain are almost entirely symptom-focused. You're in pain. Here's something to block the pain signal. The inflammation, here's something to reduce it temporarily. But none of that addresses why the inflammation is happening in the first place, why that particular tooth became vulnerable, what environmental factors in your mouth created conditions for bacteria to thrive and trigger the immune response that manifests as pain. It's reactive medicine, valuable for acute crises, but limited for chronic or recurring issues. The Japanese approach I discovered was different. It wasn't about suppressing signals. It was about creating conditions where the signals weren't necessary anymore, where the body's natural defenses could function optimally, where bacterial populations stayed balanced instead of pathogenic, where circulation and oxygenation supported tissue health rather than leaving areas vulnerable. This philosophical difference was profound because it meant the goal wasn't just pain relief, it was oral ecology restoration, and that required a completely different set of actions. Somewhere along this search, I stumbled upon something unexpected, not a miracle cure, not a trendy hack, but a simple, almost overlooked habit practiced in certain parts of Japan, a cultural approach rooted in consistency, awareness, and respect for how the body heals itself. The core of this practice revolves around what's called gingival stimulation therapy. It's not a formal medical term you'll find in American dental textbooks, but in Japan, particularly among older generations and traditional health practitioners, it's a recognized method for maintaining gum health and managing tooth-related pain. The principle is straightforward. Most tooth pain that isn't caused by acute trauma or severe decay is related to inflammation in the gum tissue surrounding the tooth. That inflammation is caused by bacterial accumulation, poor circulation, and immune system activation. If you can address those three factors, the pain often reduces significantly, even if the underlying dental issue still needs professional attention. At first, I was skeptical. Could something so simple really make a difference where medications barely held the line? But the more I explored, the more it started to make sense. Think about how we approach oral care in the West. We brush our teeth, usually quickly, often aggressively, focusing on the tooth surfaces. We might floss, though most people do it inconsistently. We use mouthwash, which kills bacteria indiscriminately, including beneficial ones. And that's it. 2 minutes, twice a day, mechanical cleaning and chemical warfare. There's no attention to the gums themselves except as obstacles to reach the teeth. No consideration for circulation or tissue health. No awareness of the bacterial ecosystem that needs to be balanced, not annihilated. The Japanese methods I was learning about took a completely different approach. They treated the gums as the foundation of oral health. The teeth were important, yes, but secondary to the tissue that supported them. And they recognized that mechanical stimulation, done correctly, could dramatically improve gum health, reduce inflammation, and activate the body's own healing responses. This Japanese habit revolves around daily oral care rituals that go beyond brushing, involving techniques that stimulate circulation in the gums, reduce bacterial overload naturally, and calm the nervous system response tied to pain perception. It's not aggressive, it's not immediate, but it's intentional. The first technique I learned was what I'll call precision gum massage. Using clean fingers or a specialized soft rubber tool, you apply gentle but firm pressure to the gum tissue around the affected tooth, and actually around all teeth as part of a comprehensive routine. The motion is circular, slow, deliberate. You're not scrubbing or pushing hard. You're stimulating blood flow through compression and release. When I first tried this, I was surprised by how sensitive my gums were. Not painful exactly, but reactive. I could feel the pressure radiating into the tissue, could sense areas that were more inflamed than others. The instruction was to spend about 30 seconds per section of gums, upper right, upper left, lower right, lower left, front and back. That meant roughly 2 minutes of gum massage total, performed twice daily, morning and evening. One of the core elements involves gentle gum stimulation using precise movements that activate blood flow in the affected area. Increased circulation means more oxygen and nutrients reaching the tissues, which supports the body's natural repair processes. This isn't guesswork. Studies have shown that improved gum circulation can significantly reduce inflammation and sensitivity over time. The science behind this is actually well documented, even if the practice isn't common in Western dentistry. When you massage gum tissue, you mechanically compress the tiny blood vessels in the area. When you release that pressure, blood flow increases, a phenomenon called reactive hyperemia. This surge of blood brings white blood cells that fight infection, nutrients that support tissue repair, and oxygen that helps reduce anaerobic bacterial populations, the ones most associated with gum disease and inflammation. Additionally, the mechanical stimulation activates something called mechanoreceptors in the gum tissue, nerve endings that respond to pressure. When activated, these receptors send signals that can actually modulate pain perception, similar to why rubbing a sore muscle helps it feel better. It's the same principle behind why dental hygienists use those rubber-tipped stimulators, though most people don't use them at home with the consistency needed to see results. Another key aspect is the use of warm saline rinses combined with mindful breathing. It sounds almost too simple, but there's a reason it works. The traditional method involves dissolving natural sea salt in warm, not hot, water, about half a teaspoon per cup. The temperature should be just warm enough to feel soothing but not uncomfortable. You take a mouthful of this solution and hold it around the affected tooth for 30 to 60 seconds. not just swishing aggressively, but letting it sit, letting the warmth penetrate the tissue, letting the salt do its work. Then you gently swish and spit. And here's the part that felt strange at first, but proved crucial: the breathing component. While holding the warm salt water in your mouth, you breathe slowly and deeply through your nose. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, exhale for 6 counts. This controlled breathing pattern activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode that's the opposite of the fight or flight stress response. Salt water helps create an environment that's less favorable for harmful bacteria, while the warmth soothes nerve endings. Meanwhile, controlled breathing reduces stress signals in the brain, which are directly linked to how intensely we perceive pain. This combination addresses pain from multiple angles simultaneously. The salt creates an osmotic environment that draws fluid out of swollen gum tissue, reducing pressure and inflammation. It also makes the oral environment less hospitable for pathogenic bacteria, while being gentle enough not to disrupt the beneficial bacterial populations completely. The warmth increases local blood flow, similar to the massage effect, and has a direct analgesic effect on nerve endings. Heat doesn't eliminate pain signals, but it modulates them, makes them less sharp, less urgent. And the breathing component works on the central nervous system level. Pain isn't just a peripheral signal. It's processed and amplified or reduced by the brain based on your stress state. When you're anxious, tense, sleep-deprived, conditions common with chronic pain, your pain threshold drops. The same stimulus hurts more because your nervous system is primed to interpret signals as threats. Controlled breathing reverses this. It signals safety to the brain. And in that state, pain perception genuinely decreases. And then there's consistency, the part most people underestimate. This isn't about doing something once and expecting instant relief. It's about creating a daily rhythm that gradually shifts the internal environment of the mouth from reactive to balanced. I'll be honest. The first 2 days, I didn't notice much change. I did the gum massage. I did the warm salt rinses with the breathing. I followed the routine exactly as I'd learned it. And the pain was still there. Not worse, but not noticeably better either. And I felt that familiar skepticism creeping back in. This is just placebo, I thought. Just another thing that doesn't actually work, but feels like you're doing something productive. But I'd committed to trying this for at least a week before judging it. So I continued. Day 3, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not a sudden absence of pain. But when I woke up that morning, the throbbing that usually started within minutes of consciousness was delayed. I laid there, surprised, waiting for it to kick in. It did, eventually, but it took 20 minutes instead of 2. And when it came, it felt muted, like the volume had been turned down by 20%, small, but real. Right around here is when something clicked for me. I realized I was experiencing the compound effect of multiple small actions. The gum massage wasn't a cure. The salt rinses weren't a cure. The breathing wasn't a cure. But together, performed consistently, they were changing the conditions that allowed the pain to dominate. Each element supported the others. Better circulation meant better tissue health. Better tissue health meant less inflammation. Less inflammation meant reduced pain signals. Reduced pain signals meant less stress. Less stress meant better pain tolerance and better immune function. It was a positive feedback loop instead of the negative spiral I'd been in. If you've been dealing with constant tooth pain, relying on medication just to get through the day, there's actually a practical way to start applying this approach step by step. Deixamos no primeiro link na descrição um guia prático para você acessar de forma rápida. Clique e veja, because once you understand how these small actions connect, they stop feeling random and start becoming a system. By day 5, the change was undeniable. The pain was still present, but it had lost its grip on me. I could eat on that side of my mouth again if I was careful. I could sleep through most of the night without waking up. I could think about things other than when I'd need to take my next dose of painkillers. Actually, that was another shift I noticed. I'd gone from taking ibuprofen every 4 to 6 hours to taking it maybe once a day, usually in the evening as a precaution. The pain was there, but it was background noise instead of the main channel. As I kept following this method, something subtle began to change. The urgency I used to feel, that desperate need for immediate relief, started fading. In its place came clarity. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was participating in the healing process. This psychological shift might have been the most significant change of all. For weeks, I'd felt victimized by the pain. It was something happening to me outside my control that I could only endure or temporarily suppress. But as I practiced these techniques, I started to feel agency again. I was doing something that produced measurable effects. I could track the improvements day by day, and even when the pain spiked, which still happened, I had tools to address it beyond just waiting for a pill to kick in. That sense of empowerment changed my relationship with the discomfort. It was still unpleasant, still something I wanted to resolve permanently, but it was no longer this overwhelming force that determined the quality of my entire day. The pain didn't vanish overnight, that's important to say, but it became less intense, less frequent, more manageable, and for the first time I felt like I wasn't dependent on something external to function. By the end of the second week, I was functioning at maybe 80 to 85% of normal. The tooth was still sensitive. There were still moments of sharp pain if I bit down wrong or if cold air hit it at the wrong angle. But the constant throbbing had stopped. The inflammation that had made my whole jaw ache had reduced significantly, and I'd gone multiple nights sleeping completely through without pain waking me up. I still needed to see a dentist. I knew that. Whatever was causing this, a cavity, a crack, gum recession exposing the root, wasn't going to heal completely without professional intervention. But I'd bought myself time. And I'd done it without escalating medication doses, without developing a dependency on painkillers, without spending money I didn't have on emergency dental visits. What fascinated me most is how this aligns with what science already tells us. The body is constantly trying to restore balance. Inflammation isn't the enemy, it's a signal. Pain isn't just suffering, it's communication. When we support the body instead of silencing it, the response changes. I started reading actual research papers on gingival health, inflammatory responses, and the oral microbiome. And everything I was experiencing had scientific backing. Studies showed that regular gum massage increased local blood flow by up to 30% and reduced inflammatory markers in gingival tissue. Research on saline rinses demonstrated antibacterial properties and reduction in plaque formation. Papers on controlled breathing documented its effects on pain perception and stress hormone reduction. None of this was pseudoscience or wishful thinking. These were measurable physiological effects, documented in peer-reviewed literature explaining exactly why the practices I'd been following produced the results they did. The only reason these methods aren't mainstream in Western dentistry is cultural and economic, not scientific. They require time and patient education rather than quick procedures and products. They don't generate revenue for pharmaceutical companies or dental suppliers. They emphasize prevention and self-care over intervention and treatment, but they work. Of course, this doesn't replace professional dental care. Cavities, infections, structural issues, those need proper treatment. But for so many people stuck in that loop of recurring discomfort, fear of the dentist, or lack of access to immediate care, this offers something different. I want to be very clear about this because I don't want anyone to delay necessary dental treatment because they're trying to manage everything at home. If you have an abscess, a severe infection, a cracked tooth, advanced decay, you need a dentist. These techniques will help manage symptoms and support healing, but they won't fix structural problems. But here's the reality for millions of people. Dental care is expensive. Insurance often doesn't cover enough. Emergency visits can cost hundreds or thousands of dollars, and even with insurance, getting an appointment can take weeks. During that waiting period, or for people who simply can't afford treatment right now, what are the options? Continue suffering and downing painkillers, or try evidence-based self-care methods that might significantly reduce pain and inflammation while you figure out your next steps. For me, the choice was obvious: a starting point, a way to regain a sense of control. That's what this method provided, not a complete solution, but a bridge from crisis to stability. And for some people, it might be even more than that, because not all tooth pain is caused by structural damage that requires intervention. Some is caused purely by gum inflammation, bacterial imbalance, or nerve sensitivity, conditions that can genuinely improve with proper care and time. I'm not a dentist. I can't diagnose what's causing your pain, but I can tell you that understanding the difference between pain that's a signal of ongoing damage versus pain that's part of the healing process changed everything for me. And if you're someone who feels like this pain has been quietly taking over your routine, affecting how you eat, how you sleep, how you focus, there's a deeper method behind this approach that brings all these elements together in a practical, accessible way. Deixamos no primeiro link na descrição guia prático para você acessar de forma rápida. Clique e veja. Because the truth is, relief isn't always about speed. Sometimes it's about direction. That distinction, speed versus direction, became a kind of mantra for me. Our culture is obsessed with speed. Fast food, fast internet, fast relief. Pop a pill and get back to productivity. But some things can't be rushed without consequences. Healing is one of them. When you suppress pain without addressing its cause, you're not healing faster. You're just masking the problem while it potentially gets worse. When you support the body's natural processes, even if they're slower, you're moving in a sustainable direction. You're creating conditions for genuine recovery rather than temporary management. This doesn't mean you have to suffer unnecessarily. The techniques I learned provided significant relief, often within days. But the relief came from actually improving the situation, not just numbing the signals. 3 weeks into this practice, I finally made it to a dentist. The urgency was gone, so I was able to find a provider who accepted my insurance and had decent reviews rather than just going to the first emergency clinic that would take me. The dentist examined the tooth, took X-rays, and gave me the diagnosis: a small cavity that had progressed close to the nerve, causing inflammation in the surrounding gum tissue. It needed to be filled, but it wasn't an emergency. No infection, no abscess, no immediate danger of losing the tooth. "You're lucky you came in when you did," he said. "If this had gone much longer, you might have needed a root canal." I didn't tell him about the weeks I'd waited, about how I'd managed the pain with traditional Japanese methods while I saved up money and built up courage for this visit. I just nodded and scheduled the filling. But here's what struck me during that appointment. He noticed the health of my gums. "Your gum tissue looks really good," he commented while examining my mouth. "Very little inflammation. You must be taking care of them." I was, just not in the way he probably assumed. The daily massage, the salt rinses, the attention I'd been paying to oral health beyond just brushing, all of it had created visible improvements that a professional could identify. The tooth still had a cavity. That hadn't changed, but the environment around it had improved dramatically. And that made the treatment simpler, the recovery faster, and the long-term prognosis better. As I reached the end of this journey, what stayed with me wasn't just the reduction in pain. It was the realization that there are alternatives, not perfect ones, not instant ones, but real ones, paths that respect the body instead of overriding it. I'm not anti-medication. I'm not anti-dentistry. I'll take painkillers when I need them. I got the cavity filled, but I'm also not willing to accept the narrative that these are the only options. That pain means you either suffer or medicate, that oral health means you either neglect it or pay professionals to fix it. There's a middle path, a practice, a way of engaging with your body that's proactive, informed, and sustainable. And once you experience that, once you see tangible results from simple, consistent actions, it changes how you approach health in general. That quiet, constant pain that once controlled everything, it no longer had the same power. And maybe that's the biggest shift of all, because even after the filling, I continued the practices. The gum massage, the salt rinses, the mindful breathing. Not because I had acute pain anymore, but because I'd learned something valuable. Prevention is easier than crisis management. Maintaining gum health is simpler than treating gum disease. Supporting your body's natural defenses is more sustainable than constantly suppressing symptoms. And the time investment is minimal, 5 to 10 minutes twice a day. Less time than I used to spend managing pain, worrying about pain, or recovering from pain. The tooth that had dominated my life for weeks became just another tooth, functional, unremarkable, exactly as it should be. If this kind of content speaks to you, but if you're looking for real, grounded ways to understand your body and break free from cycles that feel endless, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Because this is just one piece of a much bigger journey toward living with more clarity, more control, and a lot less pain. The methods I discovered aren't exclusive to tooth pain. The principles, supporting natural healing, addressing root causes, building sustainable practices, apply across so many areas of health and life. And the more you understand those principles, the more empowered you become. Not as someone who needs constant external intervention to function, but as someone who knows how to work with their body, who understands the signals it sends, who has tools to address problems before they become crises. That's the real value of what I learned. Not just pain relief, but a different relationship with health entirely. One based on understanding instead of fear, on partnership instead of conflict, on sustainable practices instead of emergency interventions. And if you're dealing with tooth pain right now, that relentless, exhausting, life-disrupting pain, I want you to know there's a path forward that doesn't require you to just endure it or medicate it into temporary submission. There's a way to address it that's accessible, evidence-based, and genuinely effective for many people. It won't work for everyone. It won't solve every dental problem, but for the millions of people caught between unbearable pain and unaffordable or inaccessible dental care, it offers something invaluable: hope, relief, control. And sometimes that's everything.